Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Today, we cover the results of the contentious election from last year and begin the story of a years-long legal battle regarding judicial appointments that leads to one of the most important Supreme Court decisions yet. Welcome to 1801 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and we'll begin by picking up where we left off last year, reading from letters between Hamilton and his acquaintances. John Marshall writes to Hamilton on the 1st of January, saying, I received this morning your letter of the 26th of December. It is, I believe, certain that Jefferson and Burr will come to the House of Representatives with equal votes. The returns have been all received, and this is the general opinion. Being no longer in the House of Representatives and consequently compelled by no duty to decide between them, my own mind has scarcely determined to which of these gentlemen the preference was due. To Mr. Jefferson, whose political character is better known than that of Mr. Burr, I have felt almost insuperable objections. His foreign prejudices seem to me totally to unfit him from the chief magistrate of a nation which cannot indulge those prejudices without sustaining debt and permanent injury. In addition to this solid and immovable objection, Mr. Jefferson appears to me to be a man who will embody himself with the House of Representatives. By weakening the office of president, he will increase his personal power. He will diminish his responsibility, sap the fundamental principles of the government, and become the leader of that party which is about to constitute the majority of the legislature. The morals of the author and the letter to Massey can not be pure. With these impressions concerning Mr. Jefferson, I was in some degree disposed to view with less apprehension any other character, and to consider the alternative now offered as a circumstance not to be entirely neglected. Your representation of Mr. Burr, with whom I am totally unacquainted, shows that from him still greater danger than even from Mr. Jefferson may be apprehended. Such a man as you describe is more to be feared and may do more immediate if not greater mischief. Believing that you know him well and are impartial, my preference would certainly not be for him, but I can take no part in this business. I cannot bring myself to aid Mr. Jefferson. Perhaps my respect of myself should, in my present situation, deter me from using any influence, if indeed I possessed any, in support of either gentleman. Although no consideration could induce me to be the Secretary of State while there was a president whose political system I believed to be at variance with my own. Yet this cannot be so well known to others, and it might be suspected that a desire to be well with the successful candidate had in some degree governed my conduct. With you, I am in favor of ratifying our treaty with France, though I am far, very far from approving it. There is, however, one principle which I think it right to explain. Our envoys were undoubtedly of opinion that our prior treaty with Britain would retain its stipulated advantages, and I think that opinion correct. Was our convention with any other nation than France, I should feel no solitude on the subject. But France, the most encroaching nation on earth, will claim a literal interpretation, and our people will decide in her favor. Those who could contend that a promise not to permit privateers of the enemy of France to be fitted out in our ports amounted to a grant of that privilege to France would not hesitate to contend that a stipulation giving to France on the subject of privateers and prizes the privileges of the most favored nation placed her on equal ground with any other nation whatever. In consequence of this temper in our own country, I think the ratification of the treaty ought to be accompanied with a declaration of the sense in which it is agreed to. This, however, is only my opinion. On January 3rd, Jefferson pays Martha Washington a visit of condolence at Mount Vernon, and little is recorded about the visit besides the dates and means of Jefferson's travel to and from. This is not a fact-checking podcast, but when I consistently see the same claim repeated over and over without strong basis, I do try to call it out. I've done this for the Betsy Ross flag and for the claim that St. Clair was hanging deserters. Maybe these accounts of history are not as sensational, but they are definitely highly factual. There's an incredibly famous claim that, from what I can tell, only dates back to the late 1850s that goes something like, "The visit of Mr. Jefferson to Mount Vernon after George Washington's death was not a welcome one, and is shown by the remark of Mrs. Washington that it was the second most painful occurrence of her life, the first being the death of her husband." So that claim's earliest iteration originates from Henry S. Randall in 1858 when writing a biography, The Life of Thomas Jefferson, and Randall attributes the story to a member of the family without naming a specific person, and does not claim to have heard it directly from Martha. It seems the claim was popularized in 2003 when it was published in the Journal of the Early Republic. By omitting this singular claim, there's nothing at all to suggest that the meeting was anything but cordial, and to the contrary, the day after the meeting, Jefferson actually writes in a letter to his daughter, Mary, "I went yesterday to Mount Vernon where Mrs. Washington and Mrs. Lewis inquired very kindly after you." It seems that many of the sources that make the claim about the meeting being somehow a bitter one also confuse the date, mentioning that there was sometime in June as the timing, despite the primary sources, such as Jefferson's own letters confirming that January 3rd is the date that he went to visit Martha. It's little things like this that sometimes take me a while to write, as if it wasn't for reading these 200-year-old letters myself, I'd be sitting here repeating the same unfounded claims that exist everywhere else on the internet. I won't claim to be perfect, and although I haven't seen anything yet, if I ever get something wrong, just know I'm always doing my best to give you only the best and most factual information. On January 10th, William Henry Harrison becomes the first governor of the Indiana Territory. Later in the month, John Marshall, the man that we just read that letter to Hamilton from, is appointed Chief Justice of the United States and is a highly influential man who will continue to come up in various cases that we'll discuss throughout the years to come. On February 11th, the votes received from state electors are opened and counted in a joint session of Congress. It's been a contentious year leading up to this moment, and there are probably few men more anxious to hear the votes read than the man reading them. Thomas Jefferson, as current vice president, is also the president of the Senate, and thus presides over this joint session. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for moments like this, but of course we're predating C-SPAN by a few decades here. This next portion comes directly from the Annals of Congress and is our best bet to feel like we're in the room. Mr. Speaker, attended by the House, then went into the Senate chamber and took seats therein. When both houses being assembled, Mr. Rutledge and Mr. Nicholas, the tellers on the part of the House, together with Mr. Wells, the teller on the part of the Senate, took seats at a table provided for them in the front of the President of the Senate. The Presidents of the Senate, in the presence of both houses, proceeded to open the certificates of the electors of the several states, beginning with the state of New Hampshire, and as the votes were read, the tellers on the part of each house counted and took the lists of the same name, which being compared were delivered to the President of the Senate, and are here as follows. New Hampshire, with 6 electors, casts 6 votes for John Adams and 6 votes for Charles Pinckney. Massachusetts, with 16 electors, casts 16 votes for John Adams and 16 votes for Charles Pinckney. Rhode Island, with 4 electors, casts 4 votes for John Adams and 3 votes for Charles Pinckney, and 1 vote for John Jay. Connecticut, with 9 electors, casts 9 votes for John Adams and 9 votes for Charles Pinckney. Vermont, with 4 electors, casts 4 votes for John Adams and 4 votes for Charles Pinckney. New York, with 12 electors, casts 12 votes for Thomas Jefferson and 12 votes for Aaron Burr. New Jersey, with 7 electors, casts 7 votes for John Adams and 7 votes for Charles Pinckney. Pennsylvania, with 15 electors, cast 8 votes for Thomas Jefferson, 8 votes for Aaron Burr, 7 votes for John Adams, and 7 votes for Charles Pinckney. Delaware, with 3 electors, cast 3 votes for John Adams and 3 votes for Charles Pinckney. Maryland, with 10 electors, cast 5 votes for Thomas Jefferson, 5 votes for Aaron Burr, 5 votes for John Adams, and 5 votes for Charles Pinckney. North Carolina's 12 electors cast 8 votes for Thomas Jefferson, 8 votes for Aaron Burr, 4 votes for John Adams and 4 votes for Charles Pinckney. Tennessee's 3 electors cast 3 votes for Thomas Jefferson and 3 votes for Aaron Burr. South Carolina's 8 electors cast 8 votes for Thomas Jefferson, 8 votes for Aaron Burr. Georgia's 4 electors cast 4 votes for Thomas Jefferson and 4 votes for Aaron Burr. The total number of electors being 138, Thomas Jefferson receives 73 votes. Aaron Burr receives 73 votes. John Adams receives 65 votes. Charles Pinckney 64 votes. John Jay 1 vote. So we've got a problem. Both Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr have received 73 votes. The Democratic Republicans have taken it thanks to Virginia, the southern states, and a key last-minute flip in New York, but confusion and a constitutional crisis begin. Under the Constitution, electors do not designate which candidate is for president or vice president, so the tie must be resolved in the House of Representatives. The Federalist-controlled House must choose between Jefferson and Burr. Some Federalists consider supporting Burr, viewing him as more pliable or cynical, and the result is a days-long deadlock in the House, so we'll pick up from them now. The President of the Senate, in pursuance of the duty enjoined upon him, announced the state of the votes to both houses and declared that Thomas Jefferson of Virginia and Aaron Burr of New York, having the greatest number and a majority of the votes of all the electors appointed, and being equal, it remained for the House of Representatives to determine the choice. The two houses then separated, and the House of Representatives, being returned to their chamber, proceeded in the manner prescribed by the Constitution to the choice of a President of the United States. The members of the respective states then proceeded to ballot in the manner prescribed by the rule aforesaid, and the tellers appointed by the states respectively, having put duplicates of their votes into the general ballot boxes prepared for the purpose. The votes contained therein were taken out and counted, and the result being reported to the Speaker, he declared to the House that the votes of 8 states had been given for Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, the votes of 6 states for Aaron Burr of New York, and the votes of 2 states were divided. The Constitution of the United States requiring that the votes of 9 states should be necessary to constitute a choice of President of the United States, a motion was made and seconded that the ballot for the President be repeated in 1 hour, and the question being taken by the states, it passed in the negative. The states then proceeded in the manner aforesaid to a second ballot, and upon examination of the ballot boxes, it appeared that the votes of 8 states had been given for Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, the votes of 6 states for Aaron Burr of New York, and that the votes of 2 states were divided. The states then proceeded in like manner to a third ballot, and upon examination of, the result was declared to be the same. So 3 votes in, and nobody's willing to budge. Occasionally, hour-long breaks are taken in which the representatives are able to discuss amongst themselves their choices. At 1 in the morning on February 11th, the 20th ballot is taken, and upon examination of, the result was declared to be the same. This continues and continues all the way up until noon the next day, when the 28th ballot is counted, and upon examination thereof, the result is declared to be the same. So it is ordered that the ballot be repeated the following day at 11 and not before. It is Friday the 13th when the time agreed upon by the last vote expires, and they vote on their 29th ballot again. The result is declared to be the same, and it's ordered that a ballot be repeated again tomorrow at 12 o'clock and not before. So on Saturday the 14th, a 30th ballot is taken, as well as a 31st, 32nd, and 33rd, all resulting in the same result. It is then decided that the ballot be repeated on Monday next and not before. The 34th ballot is counted on Monday the 16th, and again, the result is unchanged. Finally, on Tuesday the 17th of February, a 35th ballot is taken and the result is declared to be the same. It's ordered that the ballot be repeated in 1 hour, and I so intensely wish that I could know what has taken place in this last hour, because the 36th ballot finally returns a different result. The time agreed upon by the last mentioned vote being expired, the states proceeded in manner aforesaid to the 36th ballot, and upon examination of the result being reported by the tellers to the Speaker declared to the House that the votes of 10 states had been given to Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, the votes of 4 states for Aaron Burr of New York, and that the votes of 2 states had been given in blank, and that consequently Thomas Jefferson of Virginia had been agreeably to the Constitution elected President of the United States for the term of 4 years, commencing on the 4th day of March next. Now, while the House of Representatives was figuring all of that out, John Adams, on February 13th, signed the Judiciary Act into law. He's got less than a month in office, and this law will become a source of major contention. Stick with me here, as we're about to examine this law, and it's pretty important as to understanding not just the what, but the why when it comes to this story. The act reduces the size of the Supreme Court from 6 justices to 5 and abolishes the Eastern, Middle, and Southern circuits, replacing them with 6 numbered circuits, and these new regional courts are more powerful. The act also creates 16 circuit court judgeships. The 1st through 5th circuits will each have 3 circuit judges, while the 6th circuit will be held by 1 circuit judge, and the district judges for Kentucky and Tennessee, whose district courts the act abolishes. The creation of dedicated circuit court judgeships eliminates the justices' circuit writing duties and relieves the district judges of their circuit court obligations as well. It also makes a significant change to the federal court jurisdiction, bolstering the Federalists' efforts to create a more powerful federal court with an expanded judicial rule. Perhaps the most immediately concerning portion of the Act is Section 11, which provides that the circuit courts have jurisdiction over all cases arising under the Constitution, laws of the United States, and treaties, thereby stretching the federal court's jurisdiction to the limits set by Article 3 of the Constitution. On February 27th, less than 1 week before the transfer of power from Adams to Jefferson, Washington, D.C. is placed under the sole jurisdiction of the United States Congress. The entirety of the district has a population of 14,093 and has no governor or other locally elected leader. The city of Washington is set to have a mayor, but the position is to be filled by presidential appointment, not popular election. Speaking of voting, D.C. is to have no electoral votes in the presidential election. This act concerning the District of Columbia, also known as the Organic Act of 1801, establishes a court system for each county and defines the process for appointing judicial and other officers. Adams nominates 42 justices, 23 for Washington County on the Maryland side of the Potomac River, and 19 for Alexandria County on the Virginia side. After the Senate confirms and the President signs the commissions, it is the responsibility of the Secretary of State, John Marshall, to affix the Great Seal of the United States to the commissions and see to their delivery. The signing and sealing presents no problems, but does not allow for the delivery of all 42 commissions before March 4th. Finally, on March 2nd, just 2 days before the completion of what is to be his only term in office, President Adams appoints 16 federal judges in a series of appointments after the Judiciary Act became effective last month, and these appointments are pejoratively referred to as the Midnight Judges. Republicans see this action as a last-minute Federalist attempt to gain control of the federal court system in the last hours of Adams' administration. Adams also appoints John Marshall, an avowed Federalist who we heard from earlier, Chief Justice of the United States. Republicans see the Federalist bolstering of federal judicial power as a way to weaken the elected branches of government, just as Republicans are poised to take control. The controversial prosecutions of Republicans under the Sedition Act of '98 make them especially wary of the strong federal courts staffed by Federalist judges. Many consider Adams wielding his presidential power in this way and so close to the transfer of power to be the final straw between Adams and Jefferson, as the pair now cease corresponding with each other and don't resume until 1812. On March 4th, Thomas Jefferson is sworn in as the third President of the United States, and Aaron Burr is sworn in as the third Vice President. Jefferson has the distinction of being the first president inaugurated in the new capital city. He walks to his inauguration from his residence, Conrad and McCunn's boarding house, which is a short distance from the Capitol building. We'll now listen in to his inaugural address.
Friends and fellow citizens, called upon to undertake the duties of the first executive office of our country, I avail myself of the presence of that portion of my fellow citizens which is here assembled to express my grateful thanks for the favor with which they have been pleased to look towards me, to declare a sincere consciousness that the task is above my talents, and that I approach it with those anxious and awful presentiments which the greatness of the charge and the weakness of my powers so justly inspire. A rising nation, spread over a wide and fruitful land, traversing all the seas with the rich productions of their industry, engaged in commerce with nations who feel power and forget right, advancing rapidly to destinies beyond the reach of mortal eye. When I contemplate these transcendent objects, and see the honor, the happiness, and the hopes of this beloved country committed to the issue, and the auspices of this day, I shrink from the contemplation, and humble myself before the magnitude of the undertaking. Utterly, indeed, should I despair did not the presence of many whom I here see remind me that in the other high authorities provided by our Constitution, I shall find resources of wisdom, of virtue, and of zeal on which to rely under all difficulties. To you then, gentlemen, who are charged with the sovereign functions of legislation, and to those associated with you, I look with encouragement for that guidance and support which may enable us to steer with safety the vessel in which we are all embarked amidst the conflicting elements of a troubled world. During the contest of opinion through which we have passed, the animation of discussions and of exertions has sometimes worn an aspect which might impose on strangers unused to think freely and to speak and to write what they think. But this being now decided by the voice of the nation, announced according to the rules of the Constitution, all will, of course, arrange themselves under the will of the law, and unite in common efforts for the common good. All, too, will bear in mind the sacred principle that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possess their equal rights, which equal law must protect, and to violate would be oppression. Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Let us restore to social intercourse that harmony and affection without which liberty and even life itself are but dreary things. And let us reflect that, having banished from our land that religious intolerance under which mankind so long bled and suffered, we have yet gained little if we countenance a political intolerance as despotic, as wicked, and capable of as bitter and bloody persecutions. During the throes and convulsions of the ancient world, during the antagonizing spasms of infuriated man, seeking through blood and slaughter his long-lost liberty, it was not wonderful that the agitation of the billows should reach even this distant and peaceful shore, that this should be more felt and feared by some and less than others, and should divide opinions as to measures of safety. But every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union, or to change its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated, where reason is left free to combat it. I know, indeed, that some honest men fear that a Republican government cannot be strong, that this government is not strong enough. But would the honest patriot, in the full tide of successful experiment, abandon a government which has so far kept us free and firm on the theoretic and visionary fear that this government, the world's best hope, may by possibility want energy to preserve itself? I trust not. I believe this, on the contrary, the strongest government on earth. I believe it the only one where every man at the call of law would fly to the standard of the law and would meet invasions of the public order as his own personal concern. Sometimes it is said that a man cannot be trusted with the government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others? Or have we found angels in the form of kings to govern him? Let history answer this question. Let us then, with courage and confidence, pursue our own federal and republican principles, our attachment to union and representative government. kindly separated by nature and a wide ocean from the exterminating havoc of one quarter of the globe, too high-minded to endure the degradations of the others, possessing a chosen country with room enough for our descendants to the thousandth generation, entertaining a due sense of our equal right to the use of our own faculties, to the acquisitions of our own industry, to honor and confidence from our fellow citizens, resulting not from birth, but from our actions and their sense of them, enlightened by a benign religion, professed indeed and practiced in various forms, yet all of them inculcating honesty, truth, temperance, gratitude, and the love of man, acknowledging and adoring an overruling providence, which by all its dispensations proves that it delights in the happiness of man here and his greater happiness thereafter. With all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us a happy and prosperous people? Still one more thing, fellow citizens, a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government, and this is necessary to close the circle of our felicities. About to enter, fellow citizens, on the exercise of duties which comprehend everything dear and valuable to you, it is proper you should understand what I deem the essential principles of our government, and consequently those which ought to shape its administration. I will compress them within the narrowest compass they will bear, stating the general principle, but not all its limitations. Equal and exact justice to all men, of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, the support of the state governments and all their rights as the most competent administrations for our domestic concerns and the surest bulwarks against anti-republican tendencies, the preservation of the general government in its whole constitutional vigor, as the sheet anchor of our peace at home and safety abroad, a jealous care of the right of election by the people, a mild and safe corrective of abuses which are locked by the sword of revolution where peaceable remedies are unprovided, absolute acquiescence in the decisions of the majority, the vital principle of republics, from which is no appeal but to force, the vital principle and immediate parent of despotism, a well-disciplined militia, our best reliance in peace and for the first moments of war, till regulars may relieve them, the supremacy of the civil over the military authority, economic in the public expense, that labor may be lightly burdened, the honest payment of our debts and sacred preservation of the public faith, encouragement of agriculture and of commerce as its handmaid, the diffusion of information and arraignment of all abuses at the bar of public reason, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of person under protection of habeas corpus, and trial by juries impartially selected. These principles form the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of civic instruction, the touchstone by which to try the services of those who we trust. And should we wander from them in moments of error or of alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and to regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety. I repair then, fellow citizens, to the post you have assigned me, with experience enough in subordinate offices to have seen the difficulties of this greatest of all. I have learnt to expect that it will rarely fall to the lot of imperfect man to retire from this station with the reputation and the favor which bring him into it, without pretensions to that high confidence you reposed in our first and greatest revolutionary character, whose preeminent services has entitled him to the first place in his country's love, and destined for him the fairest page in the volume of faithful history. I ask so much confidence only as may give firmness and effect to the legal administration of your affairs. I shall often go wrong through defect of judgment. When right, I shall often be thought wrong by those whose positions will not command a view of the whole ground. I ask your indulgence for my own errors, which will never be intentional, and your support against the errors of others, who may condemn what they would not if seen in all of its parts. The approbation implied by your suffrage is a great consolation to me for the past, and my future solicitude will be to retain the good opinion of those who have bestowed it in advance, to conciliate that of others by doing them all the good in my power, and to be instrumental to the happiness and freedom of all. Relying then on the patronage of your good will, I advance with obedience to the work. ready to retire from it whenever you become sensible how much better choice it is in your power to make. And may that infinite power, which rules the destinies of the universe, lead our counsels to what is best, and give them a favorable issue for your peace and prosperity.
Now, the line, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists," is a famous one, and it's interesting that in Jefferson's handwritten copy, Republicans and Federalists are both lowercased. However, in the National Intelligencer, where the address is published that same day, the terms are capitalized as would be appropriate for two political parties. In the weeks that follow, Jefferson sends copies of this inaugural address to two of the original signers of the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Rush and Samuel Adams, as well as sending copies to John Dickinson and Nathaniel Niles. With Jefferson and Burr's election comes the formation of a new executive administration, and Jefferson's cabinet is soon composed of James Madison as Secretary of State, Levi Lincoln as Attorney General, Albert Gallatin as Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Smith as Secretary of Navy, and Henry Dearborn as the Secretary of War. As well as taking the executive, the Republicans end the Federalist majority in the Senate, the split being 17-15 with 2 vacancies, a split that only expands over the coming years, and in the House they gain 22 seats. There are now 68 Republicans and 38 Federalists. Since the very first election in 78-79, the leadership hasn't seen such a shakeup. While the terms Republican and Federalist are somewhat newer, at least in common parlance, the Federalists have held power since the beginning. But this new era of Republican leadership will last decades. Appalled at Adams' last-minute court packing, Jefferson orders his new Secretary of State to withhold the undelivered documents. 4 men have their commissions signed and sealed, but they haven't yet been delivered. Their names are William Marbury, Dennis Ramsey, William Harper, and Robert Townsend Hu, and we'll catch back up with them at the end of the year. In another bit of foreshadowing, on April 1st, Thomas Jefferson appoints a man by the name of Meriwether Lewis to be his personal secretary, and while the appointment is not all that significant in and of itself, you'll certainly hear more about Lewis as we continue our story. For now, the most notable job assigned to Meriwether Lewis is that of reviewing the ranks of the military. Over the coming months, Lewis prepares a report classifying officers by their military merit and political affiliation, and both are considered when deciding who would be dismissed, as Jefferson wants to cut back the size of the military. Not every Federalist is purged simply for their political leanings, but not a single officer who Lewis determines is in the category of most opposed to the administration stays. That's enough politics for now. Let's talk about bridges. Now, when it comes to travel, rivers and other bodies of water are a double-edged sword. They serve as the highways of the day, allowing quick and uninterrupted travel across vast distances with a heavy load via boat, but they also interrupt the travel of those walking or on horseback, especially as the water becomes deeper or faster moving. Moving upstream with large and heavy boats is exceptionally difficult, as the boat is moved either by a team of rowers or a tandem of poles pushing against the river's floor. Waterfalls and rapids often lead to truncated portions of navigable waterways, especially in the mountains, and as we discussed in 87, steam-powered water travel technically exists but is only in its infancy, and thus bridges and ferries are both necessary and well used, as overland travel remains the best way to ensure the timely arrival of mail and other important items. Now, bridges are mostly static, meaning metal or wood supporting a load through bracing support and leverage. Some counterbalanced drawbridges do exist, though they are exceptional and limited to ports. Ferries take 2 forms. There is either a robust dock built on either side of a river or body of water to facilitate the landing and loading of a free-floating float deck, meant to transport people, cargo, and horses, and these are especially popular for still or slow-moving water. In rivers with more of a flow, a dock is built with rope pulleys on either side connected to a floating deck, and the deck is moved by a man on the dock pulling rope, or a man on the ferry itself pulling an overhead line to facilitate travel back and forth. A subcategory are swinging ferries, which are interesting. They use an upstream tether to secure the ferry to a fixed point, and they turn a rudder to use the river's own current to guide it from one side of the river to the other, then turn the rudder when they wish to head back across. These are sometimes referred to as reaction ferries. Being so intrinsically necessary to the transport of goods at the time, ferries and bridges either cause towns to be built around them, or are needed additions to a town's growth. Harper's Ferry, for instance, was in use as a literal ferry some 30 years before the town was built around it and adopted the crossing's name. The construction of both of these modes of water crossings, both bridges and ferries, are exceedingly time-consuming and labor-intensive. No powered tools or building machinery exists. Everything is built using hand tools, rope pulleys, and leverage, sometimes powered by horse, but largely powered by man. Thus, it becomes exceptionally more difficult to construct a means of passing over water the deeper or faster the water is. Despite European countries being far more advanced in many ways, the suspension bridge is considered an American development, and one of the earliest proprietors of the concept is a man we'll now discuss, named James Finley. James Finley was born in 1756 in Ireland, but moved to Fayette County, Pennsylvania, and in 1889 he was elected as county commissioner, and he did that for 2 years. Then, starting in 1790, he was elected to the House of Representatives for the state. He must have gained popularity there because in 93 he was elected to the state Senate, and amid all these elections, he was also named the Associate Judge of Fayette County, a position that he holds for the rest of his life. Friends and colleagues turned to Finley with problems, and that was nothing new to him. As a politician, on both the local and state levels, Finley was constantly met with several calls for improvements to various communities. A common trend, though, was a request for better roads and bridges to make travel easier between destinations in Pennsylvania, and as a county commissioner, responsibility fell on Finley to review these proposals, find locations, and secure the appropriate funding for the requests. One of the most notable requests that Finley encountered was the call for a state turnpike to decrease travel time between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, a common trip for Finley himself when he was traveling from his home in Fayette County. While this project was important regarding travel time in general, it was also responsible for exposing Finley to several different bridge designs. One group that advocated a new travel system was the Improvement for Inland Navigation Group, formed in 91. They proposed several designs which Finley would have to review, and most of the designs were arch bridges with curved arches beneath distributing weight more evenly to their vertical supports, and they were to be built in either cast iron or wood. In the end, the construction of the first portion of the turnpike was complete in 1794, and the new stretch of road used a variety of bridge designs. It was during this time that Finley began designing his own bridges for practical use. In designing his bridge, Finley adhered to a few principles. He wanted the bridge to be economically sensible in both construction and maintenance, and wanted his bridge to be easy to construct and applicable to any site for implementation throughout the state. Sick of the custom designs needed for each river crossing, Finley conducted several experiments. He would hang weights from cables and observe the results, noting both pressure and movement. And after years of testing designs through various experiments, Finley finally designed a formula that he was pleased with, and in 1801 he publicly proposed his plan for a new river crossing. Finley obtained a contract to construct his bridge design over Jacobs Creek, which divided Fayette County and Westmoreland County, and began in Uniontown and ended in Greensburg, or vice versa, depending on which side of the river you're standing on, I suppose. Upon its completion in April, Finley's Bridge was approximately 13 feet wide and stretched 70 feet across the creek, and what makes it so remarkable is that it was suspended by iron chains. Finley's Bridge delivered on his goal of being economical, with it costing just $600, or about $15,000 at the time of recording, adjusted for inflation. Now, it'll be over 20 years before the next major step is taken in refining the concept, the use of cable instead of chain, but this early suspension bridge changes the game for crossing large spans of deep and fast-moving water, as most of the construction can take place on either side of the river instead of in the middle of it, and larger distances can be crossed as the arch is completely abandoned in exchange for the counterbalanced and leveraged means of supporting a pathway. All that's good fun, but we must now turn our attention back to war. You remember the Tripoli and Algiers treaties? Well, in the first military action under President Jefferson, barely 3 months after the inauguration, a small squadron, 3 frigates and a schooner, sail for the Mediterranean in early June under Commodore Richard Dale. This comes after escalating rhetoric from the Pasha, or governor, of Tripoli, which is part of the Ottoman Empire. Near the end of last year, the American consul in Tripoli summarized the long, rambling messages he had been sending the Secretary of State and others for a year or more. In short, he said, the Pasha's message is, quote, "If you don't give me a present, I will forge a pretext to capture your defenseless merchantmen." He likewise says that he expects an answer as soon as possible and that any delay on our side will only serve to injure our own interests. The instructions for the naval detachment that Jefferson commissions are that if they find on arrival that war has been declared, the squadron is to protect American shipping from the corsairs and to, quote, chastise their insolence by sinking, burning, or destroying their ships and vessels wherever you shall find them. The squadron is also to blockade the harbor of any of the regencies that declare war on America and, to the extent possible, convoy merchantmen when asked. On the 14th of May, the Pasha of Tripoli declares war on the United States because it has been paying Tripoli less in tribute than it pays Algiers, and it has the flagpole of the American consulate chopped down. Upon arrival in Gibraltar on July 1st, Commodore Dale learns that there is in fact a declared war, and during the next few months, squadron vessels blocked 2 Tripolitan, maybe? 2 corsairs operating on behalf of Tripoli in Gibraltar. They deliver goods and messages in Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, and escort American merchant ships, as well as briefly blockading Tripoli harbor. In the only real action of the year, the schooner Enterprise engages and quickly defeats the Tripolitan ship named Tripoli off the coast of Malta on August 1st. In July, Eli Whitney demonstrates before Congress the advantages of the system of interchangeable parts in the manufacture of firearms. If you remember back to 1908, he signed a contract agreeing to deliver 10,000 firearms by the end of 28 months, and having well and truly passed that deadline, he's looking for continued patience to continue his work by showing its promise. It's speculated that the display he puts on is a little bit more show than it is demonstration, as many of the parts he demonstrates he does not quite have the ability to produce at scale, but regardless, his work is allowed to continue. By way of our final updates for the year, the first public botanical garden in the United States is established in New York City. It's named the Elgin Botanical Garden and is located across 20 acres of farmland north of the city in the area that later will become Rockefeller Center. Dr. David Hosack, who founds the garden, wants to provide a place to study plant properties, experiment with crops, and train doctors and botanists. On November 16th, the first edition of the New York Evening Post is printed in a world seeming to speed up. And finally, you remember those 4 judges who never received their signed and sealed commissions? Well, now, in December, William Marbury, along with the 3 other individuals who had been appointed as justices of the peace in the District of Columbia by the outgoing President John Adams, sue Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison. The lower courts are not petitioned before the case is brought directly to the United States Supreme Court, where the four men seek a writ of mandamus, which is a court order compelling a government official to perform an act. And in this case, the writ they seek would force Madison to deliver their commissions. This case of Maybury versus Madison is a precedent-setting one that is deeply important to future court decisions to take place, but doesn't see a resolution this year. So for today, that is where our story ends. It's becoming a much more contentious political landscape as the fight between Federalists and Democratic Republicans heats up, but many changes are to follow, seeing that the Republicans are now in power. Next time, in 1802, we'll get an update on the Barbary Wars, and we'll discuss the formation and initial classes held at West Point. If you're enjoying the show, take a moment to share it with somebody that you know, or if possible, leave a review on the platform that you are listening to this on. If you're on YouTube and Rumble right now, just remember you can listen to this show wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you check out our X at 250 Years of USA for the photos to accompany today's episode. I'm Hayden Spencer, and this has been our story, 250 Years of the United States of America. And as always, thanks for listening.